Hello and welcome to Steps to Maths. In this topic we're going to be looking at factorising trinomials. So in order to factorise trinomials you will need to have already covered the topic of grouping. So you need to be able already to take four terms, group them into two groups of terms, factorise those into two terms and factorise those two terms into a single term. So you need to know how to group terms already. Okay, so what is a trinomial? A trinomial has three terms, so that's where the word tri comes from. Okay, for simplicity, we're going to use x, the variable x, all the time, but it could be any variable like a or b or y or whatever you like. But for simplicity, for the example, we're going to use x's. Okay, so a trinomial has three terms. The first term is an x squared term, so you know it's a quadratic. It'll have an x term and it'll have a constant term. So three terms: an x squared, an x, and a constant term. So for example, 3x squared plus x minus 10. It has an x squared term, and the coefficient of the x squared term is plus 3. Plus 1 is the coefficient of the x term. Okay, so even though you can't see a plus 1 in front of it, you know you're counting a single value, a single x, so 1x. So plus 1 is coefficient of the x term, and your constant is negative 10. Okay, so you have an x squared term, an x term, and a constant term. The coefficient of the x squared is plus 3. The coefficient of the x term is positive 1. And the constant term is negative 10. So let's look at solving. I shouldn't have said solving, I should have said factorising. So we're looking to factorise a trinomial. So we have 3x squared plus x minus 10. As I said, those are the coefficients. I have them in the right order. I have the x squared first, followed by the x term, followed by the constant. And my trick now to factorise a trinomial is I take the coefficient of the x squared term, which is plus 3, I multiply it by the constant term, negative 10, to get negative 30. What I'm looking for now are factors of negative 30 that add to give positive 1. Okay, so what are the factors of 30? So the 30 and 1, 15 and 2, 6 and 5. So I'm looking at 6 and 5 and I think hopefully maybe with using the numbers 6 and 5 I can find factors of negative 30 that add to give positive 1. So they are minus 5 and plus 6, because negative 5 plus 6 give you plus 1 and negative 5 times by plus 6 give me negative 30. So those are the factors I'm looking for this trick. Now what I do is I split the x term into two terms. So I had a plus 1 x term and I want to split that into two separate terms now. Okay? As an aside, let's note that plus 1x is the same as minus 5x plus 6x. So that's why I was looking for those numbers, minus 5 and plus 6. Okay, so I have 3x squared plus x minus 10. I'm splitting the plus x into minus 5x and plus 6x. So that's what my trick was about. That's why I was looking for two numbers that add to give plus 1. Okay. Now I have a four-term group. So I'm going to use grouping to solve this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rearrange it to keep it as plus plus and minus minus. However, please note well. Okay, that's what NB means. You have to make a special note of this. Keep it in order. The x squareds still come first, the x terms follow, and the constant goes at the end. Okay, so with a trinomial, we've got x squareds, then x's, and then the negative number. But I can group them with positives and negatives anyway. Now I just follow exactly what I've done in grouping. I take out the factor 3x from the first two terms, and I'll get x plus 2. I take out the factor negative 5 for the third and fourth term, and I get x plus 2. I look at this, and these two terms now, and I find that I have a common factor, x plus 2, and I factorize out again. Okay, so you will have done this in grouping, so you're just following the steps. What you need to know is the trick to factorizing a trinomial. Okay. Let's have a look at another trinomial. X squared plus 5x minus 6. Plus 1 is the coefficient of the x squared term. So you should be well practiced in recognizing that a coefficient, if it's not there, is going to be plus 1. Plus 5 is the coefficient of the x term, negative 6 is the constant term. I have them in order, x squared followed by the x term followed by the constant. My trick is the same. I multiply the coefficient of the x term by the constant term to get negative 6. I look for factors of negative 6 that add together to give plus 5. Plus 5, the coefficient of the x term. And my solution is plus 6 and negative 1. Plus 6 multiplies by negative 1 to give negative 6 and adds to give positive 5. Watch out for the common mistake of going minus 3, minus 2. So people think, well, I'm looking for factors of 6, 3 and 2. Oh, that gives 5. That's fine. Negative 3 by negative 2 multiplies to give positive 6, so that's no good. And it adds to give negative 5, which is another reason why it's no good. Another easy mistake to make is you've got factors of 6, which are minus 6 and plus 1. They do multiply to give negative 6, but they add to give negative 5. So that's not what we're looking for either. So make sure you've got the correct values and the correct negative or positive. Okay, then I split the x term into two terms as before. So let's have a look. Plus 5x is equal to plus 6x minus 1x. So that's how I'm going to split up the x term. Okay, so I split it into plus 6x minus x minus 6. Just as an aside, we're going to have unitary grouping here again. There aren't common factors for minus x and minus 6. So we're going to be taking out negative 1. And negative 1 factorizes. Negative 1 is multiplied by x to give negative x. And it's multiplied by plus 6 to get negative 6. So be careful with your signs here, okay? We've got unitary grouping, meaning we're taking out a 1. In this case, we're taking out a negative 1. And then you have to watch your signs. If you take out a negative 1, the grouping is going to be changing the signs. Okay, so you factorize by grouping. The x is taken out of the first two terms. Negative 1 is taken out of the second two terms. And we group as usual. Okay.